they're worse than a village drunkard, in terms of managing the state.
No, they're worse than the village. Charles, they're worse than the village drunkard and his chicken.
Yes.
Hello, and from Kampala, this is Robert Kabshenga, the bad native, reaching you from Central Africa. But in West Africa, I have another bad native on the other side.
The baddest gal, Adesofi, out here in Abuja, Nigeria.
And then the bad man himself on the other side of East Africa.
With me in Nairobi, Charles Nyango Obo. We've, we just dodged some flood bullets, so that's the story of our lives.
Yeah, I think the weather has taken an interesting turn. But something else that has taken an interesting turn is the war on Iran. And it seems to have taken a twist that none of us. Well, I think we did foresee this. Only those who decided to fight it. So, Adesua, just a quick recap from where you are. What's happening with that war? First of all, before we take on an African perspective, where are things right now? Who is winning? Who is losing? What has happened?
So I want to let's first discuss.
By the way, before you even respond, you said the last time that you were so disgusted and angry about the bombing of the school. I am sure you are now double disgusted because Trump said on camera in his airplane that it's the Iranians who bombed the school themselves. Even when their image. So, sorry, go on.
Well, Donald Trump, U.S. President Donald Trump did say that it was the Iranians that bombed the school itself. And then a journalist asked him after that why he is insisting it's the Iranians when his own head of, defense is not saying that, when no other person is saying that. And then he walked it back and he said, oh, he thinks it is the Iranians, but he doesn't really know. He said it's still under investigation. So he has walked back his statement saying it was the Iranians because there has been imagery released by CNN, which lets us know, of course, that it was Tomahawk missiles. And the Iranians, so for everyone's understanding, do not possess any Tomahawk missiles. The CNN has done an investigation showing satellite imagery and also showing imagery of the bombing, which essentially confirms that it was the US that struck the school. And I was reading, George H.W. Bush's comments from when the U.S. Mistakenly shut down an Iranian plane in 1988, towards the end of the Iraq-Iran war. And he insisted then that, he will not apologize for America, regardless of what the facts are. But this is not the first time that America has mistakenly killed Iranian citizens and refused to apologize. At least then they owned up to it. They took responsibility, but they did not apologize. But this one with Donald Trump, he waffles, right? Trump says the first thing that comes onto his mind without necessarily waiting for the facts or caring for what the facts are. So I guess there is some precedence when it comes to America or American presidents. I think George H.W. then was the vice president when that happened, but then he became president. I want to give us an update of the security briefing actually that happened with Congress members yesterday.
Yeah.
Because Chris Murphy, who's a congressman from Connecticut, a senator from Connecticut, shared what happened in the press briefing, and he said that the closed door press briefing is not happening in public because Trump cannot defend his war in public. But he says that first of all, the lead war goals do not include destroying Iran's nuclear weapons programs. Also, surprisingly, does not include, they confirm that it does not include regime change. So are they going to spend billions of dollars and then leave and still leave a hardline regime in charge. Because as we know now, Ayatollah Khamenei's son is now the new Ayatollah Khamenei. He also asked what their goals are, and he says primarily their goals are to destroy lots of missiles and boats and drone factories. But the question that stumped them was then what happens when you stop bombing and they restart production in Iran? And they hinted at more bombing, which is, of course, an endless war. And on the Strait of Hormuz, what is affecting everyone across the world, they had no plan. They had no plan before the war, and they still have no plan now. And US vessels have, of course, said that they cannot protect ships trying to get past the Strait of Hormuz. Suffice to say, it's a disaster.
Charles, a great summary from Adesua. It's a disaster. But just sort of give a quick description from your perspective. What's the nature of this disaster, and how widespread? I mean, there's many people invested in this. The Gulf states, Iran itself, the states, Israel. What's the disaster here? Because we're staring at it. But yeah.
Some of the figures are staggering, Bob. This guy
Mm-hmm.
is spending $900 million a day, and
What?
yeah, basically borrowed money. They're worse than a village drunkard, in terms of managing the state.
No, they're worse than the village. Charles, they're worse than the village drunkard and his chicken.
Yes. So and it's not as sustainable. And one of the the shocking things is what has happened with the Gulf states.
Mm-hmm.
The UAE, the Bahrain, and this the Saudi Arabia, and in another week or so,
Mm-hmm.
if this doesn't change, it doesn't look like it is likely.
Mm-hmm.
These guys are not, because these are the guys who keep both the dollar and the American economy going. The whole large bond, people
Mm-hmm.
are dumping record amounts of American, treasury bills. But particularly if you hurt the Gulf states, you're basically killing one of the largest sources of your money and the basis of the strength. Because the petrodollar is one of the things that are underwrites the global dominance of the US dollars, and they are killing it. So there are so many of these own goals that it is really very difficult, to understand why the US hadn't thought this through. And in fact, part of the problem they have with the Strait of Hormuz, you must have seen quite some writing about this.
Mm-hmm.
What is closing the Strait of Hormuz is not so much. Okay, partly the Iranian, missile threats and drone threats, but it is the insurance companies, because
Yeah.
they they will not insure shipping, and if that doesn't happen, it doesn't matter whether Trump puts destroyers there to escort ships, as long as the insurance companies are not willing to insure shipping. That is the end. So they have destroyed part of that. One of the things we are beginning to see is how this is driving the move away from renewable, from fossil energy,
Mm-hmm.
because he invaded Venezuela. He's trying to control, the oil and all that. But people are seeing a huge rush away from oil. People are just saying, look, this must end. We can't have a situation where mad people go to war and prices go through the roof, fuel prices by 50%, almost doubling. You see, Egypt had to raise prices by 30%. If this goes on, everyone will do the same thing. So it is driving a big shift away from fossil energy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
And Charles,
yeah.
no, both of you, particularly at this war, Charles has talked about the prices of fuel. Now, yesterday, the Minister of Energy or the Secretary for Energy in the US tweeted that a boat had been able to cross the Straits of Hormuz, and then the prices dropped. Did you want to tell that story? Did you follow it?
I of course I did follow it.
Yeah,
They're now
go. Yeah.
intern, an unnamed intern somewhere in Washington. So he tweeted that a ship had been able to pass the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices immediately dropped, and then he deleted the tweet. And the
Mhm.
Iranian ambassador tweeted, not an Iranian ambassador, an Iranian official tweeted that ship past the Strait of Hormuz may be on PlayStation, saying that oil prices immediately started climbing again. And then Caroline Leavitt, who's the spokesperson for President Donald Trump, did come and confirm that no US ship had passed the Strait of Hormuz, and they blamed an intern for that tweet and the mistake that was made. Now, what we are actually seeing, because I was talking to my friend about this yesterday, and he's like, we're entering a new era of market manipulation, where they try and
Mm,
manipulate the markets because they can't manipulate the facts on ground, and so they just
mm,
change it. And because we've seen oil prices skyrocket and then drop and skyrocket and then drop. I've been checking the price of Brent. We've had the cross 100 and fall back down more than once in the past week. And you
mm.
wonder, like, okay, what is doing it? Is it people watching the war? Like, what significant change happened to cause this? And then you just see some news stories that look like market manipulation. Like, for example, the G7 saying they're going to release their emergency reserves of oil. So
Mhm.
I think we might have more of this market manipulation. Of course, as I think, Charles, I don't know if you mentioned this, because the Iranians, it's now being said that the Iranians have started to, or are planning to mine the Strait of Hormuz, put
Yeah.
mines there, which would mean long-term losses for any ship who tries to pass. Like, that would mean that it's basically shut down. I also saw a report that they're also trying to that it seems that another plan is to essentially activate the Houthis, to create a choke point, another choke point, even before the Strait of Hormuz. So what we're seeing is they're essentially locking in. It's reminding me of trench warfare, World War One, right? Where everyone just digs their trenches and settles in and ready for a long fight, because I think both the Iranians and the Americans have understood that this is not going to end anytime soon. And it's the tactic. I'm seeing from the Iranians is that they're trying to mine that water before their naval assets are completely destroyed, right? Before their missile launchers are completely destroyed. And so they're, I guess, hitting them with the hammer early. We'll see in the next few days, because I've seen estimates going from 2,000 to 6,000 to how many mines the Iranians have available. But if they're successfully able to put mines out in that water, then we're locked in with high petrol prices and high
I,
diesel
I,
prices for the rest of
I,
us.
I good. I like the way you put it, Adesua, by saying we are locked in for the long term. I mean, we are already locked in. Think about it this way: Qatar issued what is called in law a force majeure, as did Bahrain. Actually, Bahrain was the first to do so because their only oil refinery was hit.
Mhm.
Then Qatar has issued a force majeure as well on gas, LNG. So for Bahrain, it's the oil. And then Saudi Arabia has cut its supply by 50% because it's only dependent on the capacity that's available on the pipeline. Now, like I said, I like the way you put it that we're locked in. For us in East Africa, that is a particularly bad situation. In fact, at least for you, you have Dangote's refinery. You can just do your own thing internally there. I mean, you have a substitute at least. We don't. But so here's the point, and I want to put this to Charles so that Charles can explain to those people who don't know. So, Charles, about this time, I think last year or 2 years ago, I can't quite remember the date, Uganda, in response to, at that time, increasing pump prices, decided to break with Kenya based fuel suppliers and decided to go to the source, but then cut a deal with only one supplier a company called Vitol that gets its oil out of Bahrain. I think it's even a Bahraini company.
Yeah.
So we at that time could not have foreseen this situation. Now, so first of all, in law, as I know a bit, once a country declares force majeure, what it does is it releases people from their contractual obligations. So, what do countries like us in our part of the world of Africa do now that our suppliers, the ones that we're relying on for fuel, are gone? I mean, and then LNG is gone. So Qatar is not going to provide gas. That's LNG, and crude oil is not going to come out of Bahrain. But Charles, first of all, explain what that deal was like so that people understand the ramifications of what has just happened.
Uh, Perhaps to explain is that the Uganda had traditionally, imported, it is oil from Kenyan suppliers who were so and who were basically also importing it from the Middle East and other places. So the argument at that time was
Mm.
that the Ugandans dismissed them as middlemen and they were jacking up the price. So Uganda
Yes.
thought to buy it from Bahrain, from source. They went to the source in order to reduce the pump price, and they did actually succeed because I think they brought down pump prices by anything between 10 to 15% or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, but something else also happened
Hmm.
recently. The Kenya pipeline company was its shares were listed on the stock exchange in Nairobi here,
Hmm. Yeah.
and Uganda, I think, basically saved it. I mean, okay, it was oversubscribed, but Uganda took, I think, the largest single chunk. So
Yes.
they are lucky in that sense.
Hmm.
They are lucky in that sense that that move, long time, might save Uganda.
Hmm.
But I think that the next few weeks, Uganda is probably staring at its fuel prices,
No,
possibly
no, no, no,
going
Charles.
up
Not the,
to 100%.
Charles. It's not the next 2 weeks. I mean, I've been surviving on some of the low cost fuel operators. So I have become an expert on reading fuel prices. And I would know, one of the things I had mastered was finding new guys who have just opened the station because they are running promotions. So they were always literally, yeah, they were 100 shillings cheaper than everyone else. So I would go there and fill up. And then they've gone up by another 100 shillings.
Wow.
And yes, that's that. For Ugandans will understand the magnitude of that. So, where we were at 4,800, we're now up 4,900, 5,000. The bigger players are at 5,100 shillings. So that's for Adesua's benefit. That's about slightly, almost close to $2. So
Mm.
but you see the bigger Charles and of course to Adesu as well. Then you've got the dynamics of, and we shall talk about this later on. Of can the Emirates now that have been sponsoring proxy wars in Africa sustain this now that they have a war on their foot, an actual war?
They're going to have to. No, so should I come in here? I
Yeah,
think
please go ahead.
now more than ever they will be um they might feel it necessary to sustain these proxy wars. And I'm saying that because of one thing in particular, and that's water.
Yeah.
The the Gulf states need water, and they do not have water. And since Israel has hit a desalination plant now in Iran, there is fears that Iran might decide to hit the desalination plants in the Gulf states, and they do not have water. And I think one thing that we have seen from these Gulf states, or the proxy wars we're seeing in Africa, is that a lot of people look at gold but I also look at agriculture. I also look at water. We've spoken about water wars before. We've spoken about these natural resources. They're in the desert. They need
Yeah.
water like mad. And they do and so they struggle with these rich resources that we have here in Africa, whether it's water, whether it's land, fertile land. And even though they have tried to innovate around these issues, I don't think
Mhm.
this is going to make them say, oh, let's leave Africa and face themselves. I think this might make them say, let us shore up the resources we want from Africa. I think it might have the opposite effect.
Charles.
I think Adesso is right. Although I think that it might change the nature of the engagement. It will increase
Hmm.
it, but it will change it. But if you look at their crisis that Adesso refers to, the just in recent years, the Gulf companies have bought land for agriculture and carbon credits and all that, which which is larger than Uganda.
They've bought whole countries.
Yeah, so yes, they have. So in that sense, I think that they will need to direct their money, I think, much more creatively. So they might probably give less of it to enterprises like the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan. They might invest less in helping their allies, buy drones and and those kind of things. So yes, we will see more of the engagement, but we are likely to see a change in the nature of that engagement.
Okay, so the related question that is now running in my mind is in the whole of last year, one of the things that featured prominently on Bad Natives was this notion of middle powers and their role um, in a new world order. And one of the things that was coming up is that because they have endless amounts of money, they're going to be very influential, especially because they're going to be the next source of money, especially since credit and other forms of financing are drying up for Africa. So I just wanted, I'm now wondering in my mind, we've talked about whether they're able to continue sponsoring wars. The question now becomes, uh, with China becoming more conservative in its financing, credit lines drying up from the Western world, aid is gone. Now, the Arab world, where people were turning to for money, and Charles, you'd know this. That's probably explains why countries like Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya have been trying to woo the Emirates and supporting RSF. Uh, so now, from a money standpoint, considering what's happening in terms of war there, do you think these are still going to be sources of investable finance from us? I mean, Uganda alone was expecting the Emirates to invest in an oil refinery. So, how do you guys see this? Do you think the money is going to, as they, what has, there's a famous phrase that has been popularized by our Minister of Finance. He told members of parliament, he told them, colleagues, the money will come. Uh, will
I love
will
that
the
video.
money
I love that.
will the money come? I know you love that video, so it's just so funny. That guy is hilarious. So, so okay. So, but do we think that the middle powers, especially the Gulf countries that had become a source of financing for some really big projects, you've got a big airport in Rwanda. You got another one that was planned in Addis Ababa, and another one, or Bishoftu, as the place is called. Uh, I've told about the refinery in Uganda. Will these middle powers, isn't this going to be a casualty of this war?
And the soar, and the soar, you want to give it
And
a first shot?
yeah,
No, you can. No, you can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Uh, yes, Bob, but they are that that is going to happen. But I also think that as a result of this, the
Mm.
the the cost of entry in Africa generally is now going to come low.
Uh-huh.
You
Oh,
were,
really?
you were telling us about new petrol stations offering cheap fuel. Eh? I think
Mm.
when now that there is less money from Western sources,
Mm.
China is being more selective and all of this, and that their hands are, if the middle power, their hands are full. Actually, it's an opportunity for smaller players,
Mm.
who felt that their wallets weren't fat enough. It's a chance for them to come in, because I think
On the
the
cheap.
red carpet now.
They will
They will,
come in on the cheap.
yes, yes, they will come in. They will come in on the cheap. But
Mm.
I think that if you look at countries like Mozambique,
Mm. Mm.
um, because Mozambique has got the thing that Europe particularly now wants, and they have been investing quite a bit,
Mm.
LNG.
Mhm.
Uh, they within the next few months, the efforts to get Mozambique LNG on the market will ramp up,
True.
and it will have you know uh, interesting consequences in the rest of Africa, because the
Mm.
LNG fields in Mozambique are
Mm.
secured by Rwanda.
Yeah.
So we will have um, just, I think, the geopolitical position of a country
Mm.
like Rwanda is going to change as a result. Uh,
Yeah, because
you
it's
know,
been
at,
deeply involved in. Yeah.
yes, at a time when the Qatars and all those other fellows are on the back, on the back foot. And I think that generally you could see as a result of that a change in the security architecture in Southern Africa. Because on
Mm.
the other side, you have a similar dynamic around the Namibian oil fields, which
Mm.
which are very lucrative. So we'll see increased investment there. So I think that Southern Africa will be one of the places where we'll first see major change. I think that Africa's Atlantic coast, you will see a change of dynamic there.
Hmm.
And
How?
oh, places like Morocco and the port of Tangiers will become very
Mm.
important. The
Mm.
I think Nigeria, despite the worst efforts of Tinubu, I think that I think that will change just 1 month of this. It will totally change. The standing of the importance of the cost and the
You
oil
know,
economies, or in West Africa.
Mhm.
Nigeria's external reserves have hit a 17-year high yesterday because of this war in Iran. Our external
How?
reserves, because of the price of oil, our external reserves have grown. That's where we get our forex. That's where we get our dollars. It's hit a 17-year high. It's been building. The work of Cardoso, who's head of the Central Bank of Nigeria, I have to give him his credit. I call him Cardi B. Cardi B is doing a
Mm.
good job. Okay,
Why do
he's
you call him Cardi B?
I don't know. His last name is Cardoso. Cardi B is a rapper, and
Oh
he's always
yes.
spitting. I like so I call Cardoso Cardi B, and I think Cardi B is doing a good job. And actually, if we look at the oil sector in Nigeria, Tinubu is doing a good job through his his. It's actually his special advisor who's doing a good job. Her name is Olu Verigen. Just yesterday, they were able to wrap up the OPL 245 fiasco. I don't know if you guys heard about that when it happened with Shell suing Nigeria. There was a lot around that. but they were able to come to a settlement just yesterday as well. The Minister of State for Petroleum, I don't know what he does. He's just a politician. He just says things and goes to conferences. But I think what we need to see from Nigeria, which it's it's worrying, but it's also positive in its way. We are going to see macroeconomic wins, and we're going
Yeah.
to see wins in certain sectors, finance sector, petroleum
Mhm,
sector.
mhm,
These
mhm,
It's going to make the top 1% of the country potentially richer. It's going to entrench power for Tinubu and his allies and his cronies, but it's not going to trickle down, right?
mhm,
It's not going to at all reflect on the lives and livelihoods of the lower 99% of the country. And I think this trend is not specific to Nigeria. I think it's just more glaring in Nigeria because of all the structural issues that we have. But I think we're seeing this trend happen in different countries, in different areas. Even in America, right? We see the tech giants, the top 1%, getting wealthier, aligning with the powers of Trump. And it doesn't trickle down to the lower classes. And I want to tie this back into what you were saying about the Gulf states and their investments, because that
mhm.
was, from my understanding, part of diplomatic conversations between the Gulf states and Iran was withdrawing their investments from America. And if you remember, even this Netflix Paramount deal that had to do with Trump's son in law, Jared Kushner, was done.
Mhm.
A lot of the funding came from the Gulf states, right? It came from their sovereign wealth funds. I need everybody to
Ah,
contextualize the conflict of interest and craziness that we are seeing here. The Gulf states are using their sovereign wealth fund to essentially buy influence with the Trump family.
yeah.
The Iranians have understood that, and are
Mhm.
asking them to withdraw this money. And so when we're thinking about investments and their entries into other countries, I think we need to think about the politics of it and the fact that people are essentially, the corruption is in our faces, right? The conflict of interest is in our faces, right? The soft power, hard power, the power of money, it's all in our faces at this point in time. So if we're looking at what the Gulf states have done by aligning with Jared Kushner, who was of course the person who communicated to Trump about Iran's unwillingness to come to the table during the negotiations. Jared Kushner has no experience, nothing that should have made him any type of special envoy, handling nuclear weapons negotiations. He's not a diplomat. He's not he's not a subject matter expert. He's just a son-in-law to the president. And so I think it's very African. It's a very African way of doing things. But
Our
we are
people.
seeing, yes, but
Yeah.
we're seeing the way that money and corruption and influence is working in this global stage, and I don't know. So I think that would be interesting, right? And how I was seeing how fragile the situations can really be, right? Because the Gulf states, in all our minds, were they're set, they're good, they have more money than they know what to do with. Well, some of them, they're building unnecessary things because they just don't know where to throw their money. They're investing, they're going to buy Netflix today, and as you said, buy a country land the size of Uganda tomorrow. But now even the fragility of that money, you see, is now in question, right? If all their water is taken out, they're suffering. And so I think that
This,
that's what we're seeing here.
yeah, and interestingly, talking about the benefits that I just outlined there to countries like Nigeria, the Atlantic coast, we did speak last time about South Africa becoming an alternative route, and therefore their harbors preparing for increased maritime. I think also we can see that Ethiopian Airways is picking up quite a bit of traffic. The thing, and so there are positives, Charles, on this, but one of the other things that you can see clearly from the Iran strategy is to degrade the credibility and confidence in the Gulf as a whole, not just themselves, but to reduce the attraction of the Gulf as a destination in many ways. Now, again, back to the two of you, but I'll start with you, Charles. There is another aspect. So the Gulf has been a destination for a lot of young females looking for a livelihood. So they've been providing an option for opportunity to work. So two things come up. If this continues, our people will have to come home. How do we bring them back? Whether we like it or not, will they continue to work there if the thing escalates? And then the next question, so for instance, are there chances that you'll have a ground war? If so, how will the Gulf states react? But beyond that, for me, is the question of our nationals who are there. But now that the Gulf is becoming a difficult destination for business and for employment, the biggest problem I have, Charles, is does Africa have an actual systematic response? We can laugh about Trump not having a plan. Does Africa have one?
No, no, we don't, Bob. And you've seen this. I was reading in Ugandan media of just how people are fleeing these countries. Africans and crossing borders, being shaken down in Turkey, and I don't know, all these other places. And
Mm,
and in Kenya, there have been very very emotional scenes of
mm,
people who have been managed to get out and gotten flights which landed in Nairobi. So two things: once you have two sides on these scenes we are seeing of British nationals and all of these things, being evacuated in emergency planes out of Dubai, and
mm,
and the scenes of them arriving to parents who thought that they were lost. Bob, that
mm.
is gone. You are looking for 5, 10 years
Yeah.
of rebuilding your credibility, if at all. But
Mm,
for a lot of countries, and Ethiopia is one of them, and
mm,
Uganda is one of them. It's, I think, these diaspora remittances from the workers in the Gulf was
yeah.
the largest source of of uh, of, uh, of of foreign exchange earnings. So that is essentially going to collapse. So we we could find ourselves even below COVID era, levels. And
Oh wow.
I don't see anyone. I don't see anyone with. I don't see anyone in Africa with a plan. So I think that in a few months, we could feel that percolating through our politics, particularly in countries which are going to have elections within the next 1, 2 years, who had, a lot of their nationals working in these places, and therefore the money going. So they'll go to elections with economies which are really, really in very, very bad shape, from both the lack of those foreign earnings and very high fuel prices. And I thought that people who were optimistic that this year and next year would look good for Africa. I thought they were on to something, but all of a sudden we are dealing with a much, much grimmer outlook.
Mm.
So, wow. Adesua, in terms of, you know, I mean, looking at it from one of the things that's been, I just wanted to go back, touch a bit on the security question. So, do you see countries some, I don't know who's been sponsoring, but countries like Libya and the spillover from those conflicts? How do you see those ending? Chad, and all of these freelance, if I may call them that, outfits that have been getting money from the Gulf to foment wars. Will they continue, or how does the Gulf now? Well, what's the fate of those groups?
So if I look at this from a historical perspective, we never see armed groups just stop doing bad things. When the funding dries out, they become more desperate. They sometimes
They
splinter.
look for new masters.
They look for new masters. We see a proliferation of warfare, or we see them go for different types of, whether they go into mining, whether they go into human trafficking, or maybe smuggling. Like they will find a new way to fund the chaos, so for me, I don't see this ending up. Oh, this would all of a sudden be good. They're not going to drop their arms just because they're not getting new drones or new money for drones. I think we might see them try and
Mhm.
innovate, and I say this as a Nigerian who's unfortunately having to deal with the proliferation of terror and new. I learn a new terror group name nearly every month. You kill a leader and then they become factions, and it's so bizarre. I was reading a report saying that Boko Haram is now sending, it's like as if they're sending their own, what do you call this? Like when a king sends his like a what do you call this thing? Boko Haram sent advisors
Mhm.
to
Hey,
Lakurawa. So Boko Haram in Sambisa Forest, from their stronghold in Sambisa Forest, sent advisors to another terror group, Lakurawa, that is in the Kainji National Park. And I'm like, I was reading the report, like, what am I reading? They're having diplomatic relations. Terror group having diplomatic relations. Like, what am I reading here? I was, it was, and we're laughing, but I'm like, this is scary. It's better when they were fighting each other. It was ISWAP that killed Shekau, the leader of Boko Haram. It was not the Nigerian army. But now you're telling me that ISWAP and Boko Haram are collaborating. And no, 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 no. So I don't think that they need the funds. Obviously, it helps them in terms of weaponry and stuff, but I don't think what we're seeing with Libya and all of that, because it didn't start with the Gulf states, right? We saw when
yeah.
Gaddafi was arming the Tuaregs. We saw when illegal mining was being done in Sierra Leone and Liberia. Like it didn't start with the Gulf states, so they would innovate and they'll find a new buyer. I think one thing we haven't spoken about yet, which I honestly has been there on my mind every single day, is what is going on in Lebanon. In one day,
Yeah.
a
Okay.
hundred
Go ahead.
in one day in Lebanon, 100,000 people were displaced, right? And the
Mm.
strangest story from all of this, the hundreds of people who have been killed, the hundreds of thousands who have been displaced in an economy that still has not recovered properly from their lows and their high inflation. The strangest story is the story of the IDF going into Lebanon dressed as Lebanese soldiers to try and get the bones of a man who disappeared in 1986 and was declared dead in the 1990s. Failed to retrieve his bones because it's not a body at this point in time, as 40 years ago. I was not even born when this pilot went into Lebanon. Mind you, he went there with a bomb to try and bomb the PLO, but the bomb went off in his plane or whatever, malfunctioned, and he was then captured and handed over to Hezbollah. But this happened in 1986. They have now gone into Lebanon twice in the past week to try and find his bones and have killed at least 41 villagers in the process.
Wow. Um, Amir, I want to come back to Africa. Let's leave. The madness is not just okay. So, just as a way of tail ending this, and Charles, if you don't mind, we could have a quick one. And please let me know if you don't mind. We could have a quick one about a major development in the media industry in East Africa. But before we go there, the one big thing that happened in East Africa last week was suddenly the East African community came alive, and there was a big summit in Arusha, and there was a jamboree, and the Kenyan president then handed over the chairmanship to the Ugandan president, and he said that those members who don't pay up should be kicked out. But I think, Charles, there is for me a bigger problem that there doesn't seem to be cohesion in many of these formerly, what I would say formerly regional bodies. Let's first leave the AU, which can't even face up to the international new order. But, East African community alone, the most interesting thing is I honestly don't remember the last time that Paul Kagame attended. Ndaize of Burundi wasn't even there. I don't know whom he sent. It was so only Somalia, Uganda, and Kenya and Tanzania.
I
Salva
thought, I
Kiir didn't show
thought,
up.
I thought I saw a picture of Evaristi in the Ashmiye. Oh, okay. I didn't realize
There
it.
was another stocky guy, fairly weighty guy around the midsection, but it wasn't him. It was a darker man. Uh,
Are you identifying him by his stomach, Charles?
that is the way you identify African politicians. If they don't, if the midsection is not sufficiently,
Ay, ay,
no.
ay.
But my point is, are these bodies now defunct in the new world order? This that we all we are left with is summitteering. Because what can East African community do now about, for instance, the wars that are going on and so on? Well, what do you think?
Nothing.
I
In
mean,
fact,
we've already seen what happened to ECOWAS. Yeah.
I think someone there is someone who said that we are not integrating markets, we're integrating failure. But but uh, but I've been thinking about this, Bob, because
Mhm.
I think I think the failure is quite obvious. But what do they do? One, in East Africa at least,
Mm.
there's one of the most active forms of regional integration that we don't see is never written about
Mm.
is this, security cooperation. I
True.
think that a lot, the security agencies and the militaries in East Africa, they have a level of cooperation, I think, which have granted the region security in ways which, if that wasn't happening, the story would be very different. So I think that,
True.
they have to get that. And then if you go on the western coast, if now, for example, it is very clear that ECOWAS was probably the most decisive force in preventing the coup in Benin last year. So
Mm.
there are those, and the without there are a lot of these small states, and Southern Africa, for example, and you begin to see, we are now beginning to say that in many ways the security umbrella,
Oh
or,
yeah.
even the fiction of it provided
Yeah.
by South South Africa, Angola, has actually kept them safe. So from that point of view, we could say something for them. I mean, politically they are very, very dysfunctional, but like you said, the
Yeah.
East African community is showing us signs that they are finally beginning to make some of the difficult internal reforms that will make them strong. So I expect that from the East African side, you are going to see a lot of cooperation and thinking around security in the Indian Ocean. In a bit in the Horn and the Red Sea, but you are certainly going to see a much more visible level of activity around
Mm.
maritime security, as a
Mm.
regional question.
Mm. Adesua, where do you
Mm.
see this regional approach to African matters? Is there something we can borrow from the security collaboration as a new architecture for Africa repositioning in the new world?
I think so, and I think what we're seeing, it's not necessarily these regional bodies. Sometimes it's just two, three countries working together. In the Lake Chad region, we've seen the multi-nation joint task force with Chad and Nigeria and Niger, and that really works to curb Boko Haram's presence in the Lake Chad region. We're now seeing,
Mm.
I believe, just last week, or it might have been this week, Benin Republic and Nigeria have signed an agreement on this, starting to fight terrorism together, right? Because now in northern Benin Republic, they're dealing with this incursion and attacks by these terror organizations. The thing about it is, it's necessary. The only Our borders are porous. Our borders don't exist. They only exist in maps on the internet, and when we speak about them, they don't exist in real life, really functionally.
Yeah.
So And so it is necessary for survival of these states that they work together. um
Mhm.
I, and I think when we think about more so maybe economic integration, visa free travel, like the infrastructural development that we actually need to have proper regional collaboration, we're not yet there. We're there in it, we see a little sprinkle. There are lots of ideas, the ideas for pipelines, and I know in East Africa you guys are actually working on that, and I believe AFC has actually led financing in some of these things in East Africa. But in terms of actually us getting to where we need to for proper integration, I think we have a long way to go. But the security one, I expect, will be the first one that we see nations working together for, because it is necessary for their survivals.
Okay, so we're going to finish on a big story out of East Africa. And I'm going to put Charles on the spot here. So, at the SUA, we woke up to the news, or we went to bed yesterday to the news that the biggest and most consequential media house in East Africa, with a long tradition of quality journalism and objectivity, uh, which had been guaranteed by its owners, the shareholding has now been sold. So the Aga Khan network or foundation, I think it's called ACFED, has sold all of its majority shareholding in the Nation Media Group in Kenya to a Tanzanian businessman. It's truly, truly the end of an era for those of us who have been in media in East Africa. It's almost unthinkable. Charles, what's the story there? What has happened? What do you think has driven this, so we can understand where we are?
Bob, the Nation Media Group was the second largest, you know, uh, publicly listed media group in Africa after this consortium that owns DSTV and all this in, you know,
South Africa,
yeah,
multi-choice.
yes, in many ways, Nation was a child of the Aga Khan himself when he started it in '60. He was very, very
Yeah,
idealistic, and
yeah,
he was he's a big picture guy. He the the Ismaili Muslim community is one of those. It's I think it's one of the most progressive, you know, Muslim sects, if you can call it that. But it had first persecution. So there were two things. The Aga Khan just, I think he had the vision that one, you needed that African independence could
yeah,
provide an umbrella where the Ismaili community also thrived.
yeah.
So, so he did two things, So he invested in this media house, which championed African independence, but it also created an umbrella for one of the most socially and economically successful Ismaili communities in the world, from which really their other global success then became a springboard. Now that is very, very clever thinking, and like you and I and the so we've discussed, it is very, very difficult to replicate this vision in
Mm,
subsequent generations. So when he started ailing about 4 or 5 years ago, it was
yeah.
clear that his successors had a different vision,
Okay.
and I think that they felt that the nature of the conflict between the state and the media, the section of independent media that remained, was one in which was taking away too much of their bandwidth
Mm,
from the more
mm, mm,
important things they wanted to do, invest in health and social services, So as we have seen them grow investment in health, they have had to scale down. They're already scaling down on media. So His Highness Aga Khan died last year. His son took
Mm,
over, and I think the young people, the younger generation, have just decided that this is a monkey they don't want on their back. But
true.
the Aziz Rostam, who is, I know Aziz Rostam is my friend. He
Mm,
is, he's a controversial guy. He's a very successful
mm,
businessman, but he's
mm,
also a controversial politician in,
mm.
particularly in Tanzania. But he is an East Africanist. I can say that for him.
Okay.
He has he has he he has fairly progressive views about how the region should work, and
Mm,
that kind of thing. So
mm.
at this point, what I can say that we are probably in for uh, you know a direction in which the Aga Khan enterprise was not willing to look at, and some aspects of it might be positive, some aspect of it might not be positive. But all I can say, let us give it a chance and see what happens.
Adesua, do you think how is the media faring in your part of the world, especially what is being called the legacy media and the pressures? Are they facing, similar strategic conundrum? Or is it conundrum?
Yes, people don't read newspapers anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, people, like I do a newspaper review every day,
Yeah.
and I promise you, anytime it goes viral, half of the comments say, "Why isn't this in the news?" I got it from the newspaper. People assume if something isn't on there, if it doesn't trend online, if it's not viral, then it's not reported. Because
Yes.
people rarely, but also very interestingly, because I was reading a piece, someone was blogging, and they said a lot of what the podcasts and all these things that are popular are based off of is the traditional news, right? They can't report
Mm,
without the journalists on the ground. They can't report, and
mm,
it's the same thing with me. I can't do a summary about what's going on in Kebi and Sokoto and Abuja if there are no journalists in Kebi, Sokoto, and Abuja, right? So I do think that it's challenging. It's a very challenging landscape, but I also think that what is now more popular rests on the back of this challenging landscape, and so it's the monetization and the protection that's it's going to. It's how someone figures out how to monetize and protect that. They're going to figure out the next era, I think, of news because it's
yeah.
necessary. It's actually
Yeah.
necessary. And like it's even necessary for those who do the internet stuff and all of that, but it's how you maintain that infrastructure that I think is going to be the key question in the coming
Right.
years.
Okay. So let's wind up with doing our event of the week, and I'll start because I just finished reading an interesting little book called Born to Run. And I went into this book thinking, I'm just going to find out a few things about exercise and running.
Mm.
I was shocked to discover in that book how and why we, the Homo sapiens, survived and the Neanderthals disappeared. And the explanation is in running. I had no idea. And that actually all of you people at Desua, Charles, were actually born to run. Our bodies are actually optimized for running.
How surprising!
I
But
know that is so. I don't
but
know my
here,
body knows that.
and
I
that
don't know my body
actually
is aware.
we are the only living thing on earth that is optimized for long distance running. Every other living organism, and that's why we sweat. And that's because we need to, and so it tells the story. But the most encouraging little story out of there, apart from me learning that an exclamation mark and an inverted question mark is also a sound in language because the Spanish use it, as do the sun in Namibia. The interesting thing that I learned is that actually you can keep on running and improving your running up to the age of 64. So, and this way you still have a prayer. Charles, we could do a few things. Over to you, Adesua. What's
I'm,
yours?
I'm happy to walk.
Adesua, what's yours?
Mine is a very interesting development coming out of America. I mean, there's a lot going on, but Anthropic is suing the Department of War and Pete Hegseth because on Thursday
But
the
first of
Pentagon.
all, what is anthropic?
So Anthropic is an AI lab, right? And it
Mm,
is Anthropic's AI that was used in the kidnapping of Maduro and in the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei.
yeah.
Anthropic's boss, I forget his name, I should remember it, released this op ed long piece about the dangers of AI and how the Pentagon was trying to pressure them to remove guardrails. Um,
Mhm.
because Anthropic has essentially built guardrails into its AI to prevent the Pentagon from using it for autonomous weapons and domestic surveillance.
Wow.
The Pentagon then retaliated and slapped a formal supply chain risk designation for Anthropic, essentially saying that there is security risk and now nobody in the government and no one can use Anthropic. So obviously there's shares, panic, everything's in panic. The Pentagon is punishing Anthropic for putting AI guardrails on it because it does not want its AI used on autonomous weapons. So they have now sued Pete Hegseth and the Department of War. They said they're still open to negotiations, but I think I need to find the piece that the Anthropic CEO wrote because if it was written by anyone else, I'd be like, this is fear mongering, this is crazy. But coming from the CEO of Anthropic, I was like, I think I need to take this very seriously, and it's quite frightening. It's quite frightening,
Yep.
and he's talking about the advances in AI, and he's essentially like someone can manufacture another COVID right now, like. There's still he's like AI is being used of and being thought of being used of in very scary ways, and we must
Mm.
prevent. Essentially, you can't allow government to just use it however they want to. Autonomous weapons is essentially, what I saw being discussed in Gaza, right? Predicting whether or not someone would join Hamas and killing them beforehand using AI to first surveil the people and then kill people who the AI has determined can one day be a threat. That these are real things and not a sci-fi movie or some dystopian novel. That these are real things being discussed by some of the most powerful people in the world, the head of the most powerful army in the world. It is absolutely frightening, and I think we need to see what the courts do with this suit that Anthropic has raised, because if they manage to pressure, and there's also an amicus brief with some Google employees, Open AI employees, pitching in there. But we're also seeing that the competition for this government contract is making other AI companies go behind Anthropic's back and try and develop these things. So I think we're entering a frightening era, but I want to see what the courts do with this case.
Okay. So one day I might just be there walking, and then AI decides that I am a threat and then just bombs me. Ah, Charles. Let's go back to the caves.
So
Charles, over to you.
there was a, I don't know, there was this incredible story that has been about some Congolese travelers came from Livingston, the
Mhm.
town in Zambia, and recently, and then they landed at the Kenneth Kaunda International Airport. They
Yeah.
waited for 8 hours to take a flight to where? To on Ethiopian to Addis Ababa.
Mhm.
And from there, they caught a flight, which I think on the plane that they got took them nearly 10 hours to Kinshasa. Now, the most
Why didn't they just?
thing about this is that Zambia is next door to Congo, to DR Congo. It is just
True.
1,872 kilometers.
I'm trying to
But
plot this in my
but
head, and my
but
brain
there
can't
is
do it.
no flight. There
You,
is no
in
direct-
fact, you
I
you
mean,
can drive from Zambia, from Lusaka to Lubumbashi, and then to Kinshasa if you wanted.
Africa
Well, thank you very much.
is just crazy.
Charles, you know
The-
the easiest way for me to get to Senegal, to get to Dakar? Through Paris.
Thank you very much, guys. Please follow, like, go to Paris if you want. But let your friends know and let everyone you know about the bad natives. Because this, as everybody who has watched us, as everybody who has listened to us keeps saying, this is the best thing that has come out of Africa lately. The bad natives is it?
You are so vain.
Yeah.
You are so vain.
Who? No, I'm just reporting
You know
feedback.
we're all matching today. We're all wearing black. Are we? What's going on? What's going on?
Black power. They were Black Panthers.
Bye, guys.
Okay, guys, have a wonderful
Bye.